too big to fail. If it's too big to fail, it's too big to exist. It's time to break up these very, very large and potentially dangerous institutions.
This is the anniversary of Wall Street collapse. Why, as President Obama said, Congress has spent lots of time bickering over health care reform, but done nothing either about reforming health care or regulating financial services.
Joe asked a very, very important and, in fact, profound question. And let me just divide her question in two parts. First of all, she asked about health care. Why is there so much bickering? And let me give you the simple and short answer, Joe. In terms of Republicans right now in the Senate and the House, there is virtually no support for real health care reform. We've got 46 million uninsured, more underinsured. We got 1 million people this year who are going to go bankrupt because of medically related bills. We end up spending almost twice as much per capita on health care as any other country, and yet our Republican friends in the healthcare industry and the big money interests in healthcare, they're saying, no, we don't have to do anything. Oh, so what if healthcare costs are going to double in the next 8 years? Nothing is what we want to do because we're making a whole lot of money out of the system. That's what the bickering is essentially about. But healthcare is not the only issue that Joe talked about. And she raised a very important question, and that is, what is the Congress and the President doing about the disaster which we're currently experiencing as a result of the greed, the irresponsibility, and the illegal behavior on Wall Street? And Joe, I wish I could give you a lot better answer than I'm going to give you. Some of us fought very, very hard for a real investigation of how a handful of CEOs on Wall Street caused the most significant economic decline in the modern history of this country, in fact, since the Great Depression. That's what we demanded. Now, what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is there is going to be the beginning of an investigation. How strong it will be remains to be seen, and I have my doubts. Bottom line here is the American people have a right to know exactly who it was whose greed and illegal behavior and irresponsibility caused this crisis. Who are they? Who is going to go to jail for the suffering that they've caused to the American people? How do we make sure that this crisis never erupts again? What have we learned from the current crisis? Now, let me very briefly mention to you some of the areas that we are working on in terms of financial reform. Number one, obviously, the need for a real investigation and for a demand of accountability as to who caused this crisis. Number two, all of us remember the outrageous situation with regard to credit card companies and the fact that they are charging millions of Americans 20, 25, 30, 35% interest rates. That is usury. That's what it is. That is not lending out money. That is just ripping off people big time. We've got legislation in that will put a cap on interest rates in this country at 15%, and we have selected that number because that is what credit unions have been living under for many years now, and in fact been doing quite well. 15% max interest rates in a usury, eliminating usury in America. Second area, too big to fail. The reason we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars bailing out our friends on Wall Street is the argument is if they went under, the whole economy would collapse. Well, if it's too big to fail, it's too big to exist. And we should learn from what Teddy Roosevelt told us 100 years ago. It's time to break up these very, very large and potentially dangerous institutions. Third area that we're focusing on is the Fed. And in that regard, interestingly enough, I am working in partnership with a guy who I like, but whose philosophy is very, very different than mine. That's Ron Paul. And Ron and I have introduced legislation which calls for an audit of the Fed. And this is legislation I think is probably going to pass. And what it says, among many other things, is that the Fed has lent out trillions of dollars in zero interest loans to some of the largest financial institutions in the world, and we don't know who those institutions are. And Ben Bernanke is not telling us who those institutions are. So we're going to get Ben to tell us, and we're going to pass this legislation. So those are just a few of the areas that we are working on, but the bottom line is we have got to learn from this disaster, and we have to make sure that it never happens again. Thank you.